Hello and welcome to the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and today we continue our 32 for 32 series with a look at the Los Angeles Chargers. You know, what wasn't the best 2020 season by any stretch, but we saw more promise than perhaps we've seen in a long time. I'm not giving any cuts to Philip Rivers. We all love that man, but just in terms of going in 2020, Tyrod Taylor, Justin Herbert, a lot of unknowns. Now we do know that they have truly anyone's idea of a great young quarterback to build around. As far as the season itself, only had 3 wins as they got into week 13, got blown out by the Patriots, but then ended the season on a nice little 4-game hot streak. So hopefully Derwin James, Joey Bosa and company can get healthy, and we can finally see what's always been one of the league's more complete rosters actually start to take some steps towards contendership. So have a very special guest on to help me break down the Chargers' main offseason strategy. He is Chargers beat writer at The Athletic, Daniel Popper. You can follow on Twitter at Daniel R. Popper. Daniel, thanks for the time, man. Happy offseason.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. And we are recording this on February 5th. So still have the Super Bowl to come, and perhaps there, what could be a big trade or something coming through the pipeline still. But with head coach Brandon Staley already hired, I think we're looking at, a good starting spot for the Chargers in offseason. So per usual, we'll be going through 3 team needs, quick gut feel around and get some workload related notes from Daniel, and then a bold offseason prediction before we send him on his way. So Daniel, let's start things off with the 3 team needs for the 2021 Chargers.
All right. So it starts with the offensive line. That has to be the priority. And I know you mentioned in the lead-in that, it's one of the most complete rosters in football year after year. That's true for every position except for the offensive line. And that, to me, is why this team has not been able to get over the hump. It's the reason why they've had, among other things, back-to-back losing seasons. Obviously, injuries were a factor in that. But they just haven't had the talent there, and they have not had the depth there to pass protect well enough or to run the ball well enough. They finished 31st in rushing DVOA last year. They could not block. And a lot of their pass protection issues were alleviated and masked by Justin Herbert's athleticism, his ability to get outside the pocket, make plays off platform, escape rushers. He has, the one thing he showed is the tremendous feel in the pocket for pressure. And he was able to take a lot of the load off of the offensive line because of that ability. But they need more talent up front. And general manager Tom Telesco admitted this in his postseason press conference. We need more talent. So that's the priority. That's where the offseason starts in terms of building this roster. It's going to be through the draft. It's going to be through free agency. They could genuinely use talent at all 5 positions up front. 3 of their 5 starting offensive linemen are hitting free agency. So they got to make decisions on those guys. Trey Turner could be a potential cap casualty. They're starting right guard last year. They could save $11.5 million in cap space with 0 dead money if they cut him. The only guy that's definitely going to be back is Brian Bulaga, and he missed most of last season with an injury. And he's over 30, and they need a replacement for him down the road. So that's the priority. And then moving down the list, second would be edge rusher. Now they're switching from a 4-3 to a 3-4. And so there is going to be some holes that they need to fill where the personnel doesn't exactly align. Joey Bosa, obviously their top edge rusher, he's more of a 4-3 defensive end. Kind of too big to play outside linebacker. I mean, he was playing at about 285 last year. Maybe he could lose some weight. I know Jason Pierre-Paul's playing outside linebacker in a 3-4 at like 275. Maybe he can lose some weight and play out there, but you lose some of his technique, as a technician, his ability to use his hands. That's how he's so successful as a pass rusher. So they're going to need an edge rusher to put an outside linebacker. And there are some guys that fit the mold in this draft that they could potentially take in the first round if they don't take an offensive tackle, or they could end up drafting later. But I think that's a position they can address in the draft. And then third would be cornerback. They have one free agent, Michael Davis, and I think they're going to end up re-signing him, but he's an ascending young player. And then opposite him on the outside is Casey Hayward. He's coming off a down year, and they could also save a bunch of cap space if they cut him, close to $10 million. As we know, and everyone knows that watches football and pays attention, the decline for cornerbacks is quick. Yeah. I mean, it's not a hill. It's a freaking cliff, and I go back. I covered the Jets in 2015 when Darrelle Revis signed that huge contract after he won the Super Bowl with the Patriots, and his decline was rapid. I mean, he went from Hall of Fame level player to out of the league type player pretty quickly. And so they have to make a decision with Casey. Was it injuries last year? I think he was nicked up, or was it a significant decline in play? But they either need to replace him if they cut him, or they need a replacement for down the road next year after he becomes a free agent. And then obviously Chris Harris is their slot corner, still a good player, but had the first significant injury he's had since he tore his ACL and missed a lot of time last year. How does he come back from the significant foot injury? They don't really have a slot corner replacement on their roster because they traded Desmond King. So that's another position. So it'd be those 3 positions. And that's what they have to address in the draft. That's what they have to do in free agency. And it's tackle and interior offensive line, and then edge rusher and cornerback.
Great stuff there. Again, O-line, edge rusher, and cornerback. And yeah, staying on the cornerback for a second, like if they bring back Davis, Hayward, and Harris, that's a perfectly fine starting trio. But now with Hayward and Harris sitting at 31 years old, you got to look in the future a little bit. So, we always kind of have the battle, coverage versus pass rush. Obviously having Joey Bosa on the defensive line, you can help build around him and all of that. But it does seem like, even if they don't need to necessarily devote huge resources to cornerback right now, it's certainly a time to get younger at the position.
Absolutely. Get younger and get somebody in there that you can develop. It's not necessarily meaning they have to draft one of these guys early in the first, Patrick Surtain or Caleb Fairley or one of those guys. They could address it later in the draft, but they definitely need to get younger and get some depth there and get some guys that they could potentially develop. If they keep those three guys together, that's fine. But if someone goes down with an injury, they can't be turning to Von Campbell, which they did last year, a former CFL player. He lost them a couple of games because he obviously had a pick six in that one game, but he made some mistakes and he struggled. And they need more talent behind those three guys. Absolutely.
So I'm really excited to see what Brandon Staley does with this defense, because the things he was able to do with the Rams, I mean, one thing in particular, like he used Jalen Ramsey all over the field. It's so frustrating sometimes when we see, teams just continuously put linebackers on number one wide receivers in the slot, or, hey, maybe Ramsey can shut down the left side, but I don't know, if you're playing a team that isn't moving the ball over there, why are you wasting one of your best players? So for him not to do that was great to see. Do you see him, I know they're different players, different talents, but more or less Joey Bosa and Derwin James are the new look Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey. Again, different talents, but you would think, with someone with a mind like Staley, should be able to put these guys, even if they are switching from a 4-3 to 3-4, both Bosa and Derwin should be in position to succeed. Fingers crossed, I'm knocking on wood that they will be healthy enough to be out there.
Yeah, so they'll be doing different things because they're different players, as you mentioned, but philosophically, it's the same approach. It's a player-centric approach. It's going to your best players with the most talent and being like, what do you do well? And where are you most comfortable? And then building your system and schemes around that. So on defense, it starts with those two guys. It's what does Joey Bosa do well? And what does Derwin James do well? Where do they want to be on the field? Where do they feel like they can be most successful? And then putting them in those spots, play after play after play, and building everything else off of those two guys. Now, the encouraging part about this defense is they have talent at all three levels, right? They got Joey up front. In the middle, they got Kenneth Murray. I know he wasn't as good as people might have expected being a first-round pick, but I saw genuine growth from him over those last 4 games. I think that was a big reason they won a lot of those games, is you saw him start to pick up on play action keys a lot more quickly. He wasn't jumping at those fake handoffs. He was dropping into coverage. He had a bunch of plays where he was covering those sort of over routes from the slot off RPOs that he was getting killed on earlier in the season. So you saw it coming together mentally. He has all the physical traits. I mean, he is a violent hitter. He's fast sideline to sideline. He's got great makeup. I mean, he has all of these attributes that you're looking for in a middle linebacker. For him, it's just about experiencing enough in the NFL from a coverage perspective to get to that level and be able to play instinctually, because he really wasn't a coverage guy at Oklahoma. It changed a lot. They tried to sort of mold him into one of those guys last year. So it takes some time, especially without having an offseason, to sort of learn what defenses are trying to do to you. And he started to pick up on that stuff. So they have that a legitimately good linebacker there who I think is going to take a big step in the second season. And obviously Derwin on the back end. I mean, when he's healthy, he's arguably the second best defensive player in football. Obviously Aaron Donald is number one, but Derwin is an excellent football player, and they have missed him dearly the past 2 seasons. But you're absolutely dead on. I mean, it's going to be creating these systems around what their players do well. That's what he's bringing from the Rams, and that's part of the reason why he got this job.
It's great to hear, because Brandon Staley knows far more about scheme and his little finger than I will know about football my entire life. But Jim's and Joe's over X's and O's, put your best players in a position to succeed. It's great to see a coach that can put his ego aside and just do what's best for the team, because I'm sure it is hard when you have a system you've been running effectively to bend that around the players. But it does seem like he is on pace to doing that. So great to see there quickly. And I'm so excited to see how he uses Derwin James. I knew Derwin was great, but seeing those like Hard Knocks clips of him like legit matching Keenan Allen step for step, maybe we'll even see Derwin playing a little more cornerback than usual.
People in the league think he could be a corner. Like, he could be a legitimate starting corner in the NFL at his size, which is just shocking. Like, he's 6'2", 220. Like, the fact that he could play corner, and like in those one-on-one situations, like there are very few corners in the league that can keep up with Keenan Allen. Like, very few, if any. And Derwin locks him up in those one-on-one situations. It's really been a shame that he hasn't been able to be on the field. But it's going to be fascinating to see, what Brandon Staley can do with this group, and what he can bring out of them and how he can put them in a position to succeed. Absolutely.
100%. All right, switching back over to the offensive line before we get to our gut feel round. I think you hit the nail on the head, man, because sometimes you look at the offensive line, and especially pressure is a stat that is sometimes seen as more, I think it should be seen as more of a QB stat than offensive line. In most cases, this is not one of them. Fourth highest pressure rate in the league, even though Herbert actually had an above average time of release from getting the snap to getting the ball out. This was a top 12 offense in screen rate. Like, he was getting the ball out of his hands pretty quick, still under pressure. And then he threw in the reality that they were dead last in yards before contact. Per rush. I wouldn't have blamed you for coming on here with 3-team leads and saying center, guard, and tackle, because, as much as we can talk about the defense, if they can just get healthy, will be fine. If we want to just talk about, what it's going to take Herbert, to the next step in his development, it's got to be just putting as many resources as possible into that offensive line.
Yeah. Any quarterback needs pass protection and a decent running game to be successful. You don't want it to be a situation where you are totally relying on Justin Herbert to go out and move the ball down the field and make these incredible plays off platform and scramble and do all of these things. Like, that's not a sustainable way to win, especially with a young quarterback. Like, you got to give him a decent running game, and they were far from that last year. So that has to be the priority. And then, you look at what happened in Cincinnati. Like, Justin Herbert's a big dude, right? He's 6'6", 240. Like, he can take some shots. He ran over linebackers this past year. Like, he's built well. So he's not necessarily going to, wither if he takes a lot of shots. But the more your quarterback gets hit, the higher percentage chance that he's going to get hurt. That's just the reality. That is the logical correlation. And you saw what happened with Joe Burrow. Yeah. He did not have an offensive line. And eventually you get one awkward hit in the wrong part of your leg, and now you have a torn ACL, and no one knows, how you're going to come back from that. So you got to protect him. In the Patriots game, you mentioned at the top, the 45-0 blowout, they weren't even blitzing. They were bringing 4 guys, and they could not handle these stunts in games. It was these twists, and they could not communicate well enough to pick them up. And Justin was getting crushed. All the way until the end of the game, they kept him in late in the fourth quarter. He took a shot to the spleen. Like, they are lucky that he didn't get hurt in that game, but it has to be a priority to protect him. Despite the fact that he's fantastic at eluding pressure, like, he has to get better protection up front, or you are risking injury to your franchise cornerstone.
I was about to say, he literally was the only quarterback with a higher PFF passing grade than Patrick Mahomes under pressure. Like, the guy, you could not have asked for him to respond in these situations better. That is one of those stats, pressure, where we see be real volatile from year to year, though, because no quarterback is better when they're getting guys in their face and they're under duress. Credit to Herbert for being able to deal with that. I know coming out of Oregon, his ability to, work off platform, when the play breaks down, that was kind of called into question. Obviously, we've seen after even 1 year that he's more than capable of doing that. Great stuff there. I want to keep talking about Herbert, though, in this gut feel round, because now, he's had 3 head coaches and 2 offensive coordinators at Oregon. Now he's already on his second set of each in the NFL. We talked about, just getting him a better offensive line, sure, but what sort of changes do you kind of expect from new offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi, specifically in regards to Herbert's development? Because obviously that's priority number 1, 2, and 3 for this offense.
Yeah, so it's really interesting how they've sort of compiled this staff. Lombardi obviously worked under Sean Payton for 15 seasons, with Drew Brees for 15 seasons. So you're going to get some Saints Sean Payton influence in the offense. But I also think you're going to get a lot of this Shanahan-inspired conceptual stuff in the offense as well, which the Chargers were running last year. Anthony Lynn played for Mike Shanahan. So that was his vision for this offense. Get some quarterback movement, bootleg, wide zone, play action, all that kind of stuff that is characteristic of those Shanahan offenses. But they brought in Shane Day, who was the quarterback's coach with the 49ers under Kyle Shanahan. They brought in an offensive quality control coach for the Packers, who's going to be their tight ends coach, who worked under Matt LaFleur, another Shanahan disciple. Staley worked very closely with Sean McVay, another Shanahan disciple. And these are all very successful offenses, right, that come from the same tree. Obviously, they have their own variations on it, but they're sort of picking these coaches from different places. And so I think some of the Shanahan stuff is going to carry over, some of the bootleg stuff, some of the wide zone stuff. Like, they're going to have that in the offense because Justin flourished with that kind of stuff. Then I also think you're going to have Lombardi coming in, adding some of the Saints stuff in there that they were running with Sean Payton. And I think it's going to be sort of a mishmash of all that kind of stuff and trying to build this offense with all these different pieces and ideas from all the best offenses in football. So the way that Staley has constructed the staff makes a lot of sense. But the one thing with Justin is he is most successful in a heavy play action offense. And you've seen it. Like, that is what brings the most out of quarterbacks with those kind of skill sets. You look what happened with Josh Allen in Buffalo. I mean, he was top 3 in the league in play action rate. And that was what Brian Daboll did. He was like, that's how we're going to make him more accurate. Let's do the RPO stuff. Let's do the play action stuff. Let's get some structure in the offense and make sure that he's throwing to wide open receivers. And it worked. And so, Ryan Tannehill, number 1 in the league in play action rate, right? That's a guy that everyone thought was dead in the water. His career was over. He comes to Tennessee and he gets revitalized under Arthur Smith and a heavy play action scheme. Like that's what Justin does well. Those are 2 quarterbacks that are athletic, mobile, can move outside the pocket. And so I think that stuff is going to stay. But you're going to get a little bit of twists and then obviously some Sean Payton influence because Lombardi spent so much time there.
I'm happy you brought up Josh Allen because I actually think him and Herbert, they're very different players, but both of them have a freaking bazooka for an arm. They're both athletic enough to get outside the pocket. And because of that, they can basically force defenses to defend every square inch of the field for better and for worse, as we really saw with Josh Allen early in his career, much more erratic than even Herbert as a rookie. But yeah, just being able to rein that in a little bit, make things easier, have some of those Saints principles in, that'd be fantastic to see for Herbert and that entire offense. Want to talk quickly about this run game. Austin Ekeler is signed through 2023. I mean, in fantasy land, this guy in leagues that reward an entire point per reception. Does that really reflect, NFL ability? No, but it's the game we play. And because of that, Austin Ekeler has been a cheat code. We did see the likes of Joshua Kelly, Justin Jackson, Kalen Ballage, even Troy Maine Pope, get plenty involved throughout the season. Do you expect the Chargers to continue to use, kind of this quasi multi-back committee where Ekeler is the lead pass down guy, but, he's pretty much splitting carries? Or do you think we could actually see a step forward and Ekeler be more of a true 3-down back?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone in the league besides the Titans are going to have a true lead back at this point. And the Vikings with Dalvin Cook probably. And you could maybe throw the Cowboys in there with Zeke. But very few teams actually do that.
You can count the total offenses on one hand for sure.
Right, pretty much. So, philosophically from the top of their football organization, they believe in multiple running backs sharing the load. And they don't necessarily differentiate between a carry and a reception. For them, it's just touches. Yeah. So that's why Austin Ekeler, he's not a typical running back, right? He's almost always going to have more receiving yards than rushing yards. But for him, it's just get the ball in my hands where I can make plays. I don't care if it's a carry at a shotgun under center. I don't care if it's a screen. I don't care if it's a swing pass. I don't care if I'm in the slot running slants. I don't care if I'm out wide running go routes, whatever it is, just put me in space, right? So they're always going to, have a committee type backfield. Now, with that being said, I haven't talked to Brandon Staley specifically about his views about this. I know Anthony was sort of aligned. Anthony Lynn was aligned with that organizational philosophy. Brandon could think differently, but think about what the Saints did with their running backs. I mean, Alvin Kamara puts up a ton of numbers, right? But is he your true feature back? No, they do a lot of 2-back stuff. Latavius Murray obviously was there. And so they share the load. They split Alvin Kamara outside. And so that's sort of the role that I think Austin Ekeler had. Joe Lombardi compared Ekeler to Kamara in his press conference. So that's sort of the vision that they have for him. But behind Ekeler, it's sort of what do they have, right? You named a bunch of these guys, but Joshua Kelly, I think, is an immensely talented player. He might've been the best player in training camp. And that's not hyperbolic. He was fantastic. He was, not just between the tackles, bouncing runs to the outside, beating these elite defensive players to the corner, making plays. And his rookie season got derailed because he fumbled in that Bucs game in week 3. The Chargers had that huge first half lead, and then he fumbled at the goal line at the end of the half, and they turned it over to the Bucs at his own goal line and turned it over to the Bucs. They were able to score a touchdown, and his season flipped. The next week he fumbled again, and he just lost confidence, and he wasn't hitting the hole the same way. And you just saw a lack of confidence in the way he was running the football. And a guy who is going to make his bread and butter in the league by running between the tackles and being that physical change of pace, you can't lose your confidence. You got to hit the hole, man. You got to get north and south and pick up yards. And he sort of lost that role to Kalen Ballage, who was that, Anthony Lynn said to him, listen, your job is to run forward, get north as fast as you can. Don't dance around. And he did a fine job with it. He was he's pretty good in short yardage. He had a good conversion rate. And he did some okay things. But so, what is Joshua Kelly? That's really the biggest question in this backfield. Can he bounce back from those fumbling issues early in the year? Can he regain his confidence, and can he show off the talent that we all saw in training camp? I think he's going to have a breakout year. I think he has the makeup to come back from a season like that. And I know he has the skill set to be a successful NFL running back. The question is, will he get his opportunities? Justin Jackson is another name we threw out there. Like, love his game. He's such a unique runner, so smooth, great vision, obviously not the most athletically gifted running back, but very, very smart, very savvy, great at reading holes and setting up blocks and all of those kinds of things. Also great catching the ball out of the backfield, just hasn't been able to stay healthy.
Yeah.
It's every year. There's something last year it was a calf. This year it was a knee. And it's like, he gets so unlucky. Like this year, the knee injury, he was in pass protection. Justin got rid of the ball. The play was over, and like a 300-pound lineman fell over and fell right into his knee. It's like he doesn't even have the ball in his hands. And it's like getting hurt. So I feel for him because when he's on the field and close to healthy, he's a difference maker. Yeah. So they kind of have these pieces. Kalen Ballage was a big Anthony Lynn guy. So I'm curious to see sort of what his future is. Like that was his biggest proponent was definitely Anthony, who was a former running back, and sort of likes these projects that he can bring in and groom. He's really good at it. Like that's one of the reasons he's a great coach is because he's very good at developing running backs. But Ekeler is going to have a huge role, and I got a bold take on him. That's my bold take. We'll save that for later. Just tease it. But he's going to have a huge role. And behind him, the number 2 spot is up for grabs. And there's going to be, all those guys contending for it. Justin Jackson, Joshua Kelly, Keenan Allen, and I wouldn't be surprised if they have another guy in the mix, whether it's a late round draft pick or undrafted free agent. Because again, Joshua Kelly was a previous regime guy. That's an Anthony Lynn pick, and obviously Tom Telesco is the guy running the show. But Anthony loved that guy like that. He was really excited about that pick. So it's curious to see how the new staff sort of views this running back group. But obviously Ekeler will be at the top and will be in his multifaceted role per usual.
So it is a unknown behind Ekeler for sure, particularly with the coaching change. But it sounds like, if you were in the, back last, few rounds of fantasy draft and you had to bet on one of these other guys, Kelly would be your guy.
Right now. Yeah. But I'll have a better idea once we see training camp, right? Yeah.
Of course.
I'll save my take for then.
Fair enough. Yeah. And we are recording this on February 5th. So I know I'm pressing Daniel here a little bit, but we're always trying to find out where those edges might be. Cause we're us true DGens. We're doing these best ball drafts throughout the winter and spring before things can even get settled. Always big when we can potentially find, a 10, 15 touch contributor down at the bottom. Hopefully Kelly can get his mind right, get back to balling. All right. I want to quickly touch on these receivers rooms. And one thing we didn't talk about, man, is the tight end position. Hunter Henry is an unrestricted free agent. As someone that watched every single XFL game, wrote far too many words about it than any human should be doing. Donald Parham did not come out of nowhere for me, but I know for a lot of other people, he might have. What do you think Hunter Henry will be back with the Chargers?
Give yourself a pat in the back real quick. Good. I know you want it. Yeah.
Amazing. All right. Do you think Hunter Henry will be back with this team next year? And if not, how confident are you in Donald Parham being the every down tight end?
Oh, I'm not confident in Donald Parham being the everyday tight end. I know he's your guy. Like he's a really fun developmental piece. He had to make some big plays last year. He had that touchdown against the Broncos where he had that little sidestep juke move. That was nice. Yeah, he's a really interesting piece. He's 6'8". He's a guy that can have an impact in the red zone if he keeps developing, but he's just not a good enough blocker to be an every down tight end. And he would admit that to you. Like he's improved substantially as a blocker. Mm-hmm. But he's just not at the level you need to be a number 1 tight end in the league. Like they have to re-sign Hunter.
Yeah.
I don't see any other way around it. Like unless so the only thing I could think of is if they feel like they don't want to pay Hunter, which I don't think they will because he's very deserving of the contract that he's going to get. But say his market gets pushed big time and it's $12 million a year, $13 million a year. Say Bill Belichick really wants him and is going after him and going to pay him whatever he wants, right?
Yeah, that's the guy I was thinking. They had some long hugs after a couple of those games over the past few years.
Oh yeah, and Bill Belichick knows his high school coach from Arkansas. But here's the thing: if Bill Belichick is targeting one of your unrestricted free agents, what does that tell you? That guy's a good player. Yeah. Like you need to keep that guy. Look at what happened to Stephon Gilmore. You let him walk and freaking won Defensive Player of the Year. So like when those guys are targeting a player, it means that he does a lot of things very, very well. And I think Hunter is a top 5 all-around tight end in the league. And I know that's going to surprise some people, but he is an excellent run blocker. Excellent run blocker. And so what he does in the passing game complements it really well. But he's a guy, like you can play a lot of 11 personnel, and have one tight end out there and still be able to run the football effectively because Hunter is so dynamic as a run blocker and physical. And so I think they have to re-sign him. Yeah. If they don't, and this is the scenario I was getting at earlier, if they don't re-sign him and Kyle Pitts is sitting there at 13.
Ooh.
Right?
Okay.
And I know and so I wasn't even thinking about this, but Danny Kelly of The Ringer, he did his mock draft like about a week ago, and he had the Chargers taking Kyle Pitts, and I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Now, personally, I wouldn't go down that road because I just think the world of Hunter Henry. I think he's a fantastic player. He's a guy I'd want on my team every day of the week. And so I think that you got to go out and you got to pay him what he's worth. Yeah. You know, whether that's $11 million a year, $12 million a year, it's going to be somewhere in that range. I think you got to get him signed long-term. And that's how the Chargers operate typically, right? They draft, develop, sign to extensions. That's like how they want to build their team. And so for a guy like Hunter Henry, came in, had some injury problems, obviously tore his ACL, then had the broken kneecap. But when he's been healthy, and they franchise tagged him and he put together a complete season. And he was a really, really, really good player. And he has a great connection with Justin Herbert. And that's a guy I would want to keep around. So I would expect them to re-sign him. But, Parham is going to be that number 2 guy. You know, if they don't draft another tight end, like Virgil Green's going to end up walking. I don't know if he's going to get signed anywhere else, but he's over the hill at this point. And so, they like Parham as a developmental piece, and he could really fit in as that number 2 guy, right? Like that receiver type tight end that doesn't really need to take on as much blocking responsibility because you have, Hunter Henry on the roster.
Yeah. And I mean, you talk about true every down tight end like Hunter Henry. I mean, we're looking 97, 99, 92. This guy literally never left the field. So he does make sense as someone that you do want to pay up for if possible. Yeah. And if Bill Belichick loves the guy, we should all probably love the guy. Not that hard.
That's
to
what I'm saying, man.
and credit to Henry for getting healthy, man. Him and, Keenan Allen to an even heavier extent were guys with that, injury prone label that, Keenan's really just erased it over the years. And Henry seems to certainly be on his way as well. Last thing before we get your bold off-season prediction, Mike Williams. In my mind, he's one of the most overqualified number 2 wide receivers in the league. They could save about $15 million against the cap by releasing him. I know the Chargers don't have a bunch of, cap issues. They could afford to re-sign him. Do you think he'll be back on the Chargers in 2021 and beyond? Yeah.
So Mike is tough because he just makes these huge plays and he comes up clutch. And so he has value in those areas, but he just never has produced at the level that you'd expect. He's an injury-prone player. He's always dealing with something. Last year was the knee. This year he, sprained his AC joint in training camp. It just always seems like he's got these nagging things that are limiting him, and he's just never been able to put together that full season, over 1,000 yards with 6+ touchdowns. Yeah. The things that you're looking for from a guy that's going to get paid $15 million. Now, what I do know is they love him internally. The Chargers. The previous coaching staff loved him, and I know the front office loves him. He's got a great work ethic. He's a good locker room guy. And obviously the skill set is off the charts. You're not going to find another guy that can, win 50-50 balls as consistently as Mike Williams does. So I think he still has value, but the question is it worth $15 million? Your only option is rescinding the 5th-year option, right? That's what it would come down to. And that just never happens. Yeah. And it's a really bad look for an organization to give a guy that they respect a 5th-year option and then pull the plug on it. If you don't want the guy on your team or you want to send a message, you don't exercise the 5th-year option. Like what the Broncos did with Garrett Bowles, right? They didn't exercise the 5th-year option. He improved significantly, has an all-pro level season, and then they pay him the contract, right? But it's sort of unheard of for a team to give a 5th-year option and rescind it. Okay. So I don't see that happening. What they could do is negotiate a long-term extension, and that would lower the cap hit. But like you said, they're not really in cap hell like a lot of other teams are. They have the lowest amount of dead money in the league right now. I over the cap's projections have them at about $15 million in spending money, which factors in what they have to pay their rookies, all 9 picks that they have in the draft. So it's not a situation where they have to create space. And typically the way they function is if they have a guy under contract, they keep him under contract and they make the decision when they get to that bridge. They don't really do a lot of preemptive stuff. It's like, okay, he's under contract. We got him. We can fit him in the cap. Let's make that decision on him next year because, you sign him to a long-term extension. Let's say he has a really bad year next year or suffers another injury. And then it's like, is this a guy we really want to build around, or can we get more value by drafting a receiver, in the draft? Right. So, I think that's a decision they'll make down the road. They don't need to create the space. So I'm expecting him to play 2021 on his 5th-year option, despite the fact that it's a high cap at $15.68 million.
And he is always playing through some sort of injury. With that said, he's played 15, 16 games over the past 3 years. But, I feel like we overuse the term injury prone sometimes. You mentioned like how randomly Justin Jackson got hurt, just trying to block.
Right.
But Mike Williams, man, just catch your fall for once in your life. I feel like every time this guy goes up in double coverage, he comes down with these spectacular catches, but he falls like a freaking bag of soap like to the ground, man. It's just it's so painful every single time. But hopefully he can put that together. Go get that money, whether it's from the Chargers or someone else. Fantastic stuff, man. Do you have a bold offseason prediction to leave us with?
All right. Austin Ekeler will finish in the top 5 in the league in yards from scrimmage.
Ooh.
I'll give you a quick reasoning on it. I mentioned earlier that Joe Lombardi in his intro press conference compared Austin Ekeler to Alvin Kamara. That to me is flashing lights. Listen, like they are going to get this guy the football in space. They're going to line him up all over the formation. Now, it's something that they did with Austin Ekeler under the previous coaching regime. But when he was playing a majority of the snaps, he had close to 1,600 yards from scrimmage, almost 1,000 yards receiving, almost 100 catches, right? And then he finished 9th in the league. But that was with Melvin Gordon in the mix after he came back from his holdout, right? So Austin was on pace to be sort of top 5. Melvin came back, and then they were kind of trying to figure out how to use both of them. Austin's role diminished a little bit. Last year, he had the significant hamstring injury early on in the season, missed 6 games, but really wasn't himself for, probably 9 of those games. Still got close to 1,000 yards from scrimmage. So, put together a full season, avoid injury, new scheme, new system, with Joe Lombardi taking some of these Saints concepts that they use with Alvin Kamara, applying them to Austin Ekeler. That's easy to get excited about. And he absolutely has the capability to be up in that echelon, because he was in the top 10 in 2019, and with more touches and without Melvin Gordon on the roster, staying healthy, I think he could be up over 1,700, which would put him, in contention for top 5 in the league in yards from scrimmage.
I love it, man. Hopefully we always hear every offseason that teams start talking about running back is to get more reps in the slot or out wide as a true wide receiver. And usually it doesn't come to fruition. That should be the case with Austin Ekeler, and having his new play caller, being the guy that has enabled Alvin Kamara. You would hope that will be such a smooth transition. Literally since 2017, every running back has lined up in the slot or out wide. Nobody has averaged more yards per out run than Austin Ekeler. The dude's a nightmare in space. Looking forward to seeing the ways they're going to use him. That's going to do it. Daniel, thank you for the time, man. Everyone go follow Daniel on Twitter at Daniel R. Popper. You're, writing out The Athletic. You got some fun stuff planned for this offseason?
Absolutely. Yeah, just diving into all the stuff. I got a offseason handbook up right now, which goes through every single question you could possibly have about the offseason: salary cap, draft picks, comp picks, draft needs, roster needs, cap casualties, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So start there, and we'll get some free agent stuff up, free agents they can target, working on a feature on Brandon Staley. So tons of content over at the Athletic Chargers page. So go check it out.
Awesome stuff. Everyone make sure you go check that out. Again, Daniel's on Twitter at Daniel R. Popper. That's good, dude. Everybody, thank you as always for tuning in to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. He's Daniel. I'm Ian. Until next time, take care, everybody.